Hey there, loyal listeners. Just wanted to do a quick call to action to let you know that our Q&A episode is coming out in February. It's just a month away, and we need Q's to A. So please go to genrevision.com, search for the Q&A post.
Look for the frickin' Riddler on the main page. Go to genrevision.com, look for the Riddler, click on that post, go to the comment section, and leave us some questions to answer. We are surprisingly low on questions to answer this time. Last time you guys showed up and dumped us with questions. It was awesome. We just need you to do that again if you can.
You can also send your questions to genrevisionpod@gmail.com. You can tweet at us at genrevisionpod. However you want to get your questions to us, please, please, please send them in. We need a whole lot more to answer. Greetings, loyal listeners and new recruits. I'm Drew Deach.
I'm Travis Newton.
And this is Genrevision. Every week, Travis and I review and recommend horror films, action movies, fantasy flicks, sci-fi cinema, and more. And this week, it's time for the top 15 films of 2019. We always do top 15 episodes. It's always an episode I look forward to a lot. We're going to kind of forego the usual structure of things as far as shelf picks and comment of the week and everything. We will return to all of that next week with our episode on Underwater. If you like what we do here on Genrevision, go to patreon.com/genrevision and become a premium subscriber for just $5 a month. You can get access to all the bonus content for all the Genrevision shows. We just did our December 2019 Currently Consuming. We had an Office Christmas Party. The show I do with Danny Ryan, Third Time's the Charm, we put up our bonus episode where we talk about the Tim Burton Batman movies, a whole bunch of stuff, and it really does keep the show running. When we say that this show is brought to you by our premium subscribers at patreon.com/genrevision, we ain't fooling. Well, with that, let us dive into 2019 in movies, which I don't know if we'll talk about this in another forum. My thesis on 2019 was, I think it was a great year of movies. It was a very bad year for movies.
Yeah, it ended up being a year full of good movies. It took a while to kick off. For the first, 7 months of this year, or of 2019 more appropriately, I was kind of like, where are they keeping all these good movies at? Turns out they were just holding back on them. You can tell by looking at our feed that we did not cover a whole lot of theatrical releases this year. That's because we looked at the theatrical release calendar and said, ugh. That's why we did a whole lot of library titles.
Well, to be fair, we're trying to move a little further away from doing as many theatrical titles. And there's just theatrical titles that were good, and we're going to talk about some of those in this episode, but they're not movies that we feel we could do an entire episode on, or frankly kind of fit within our particular Genrevision mold.
Sure.
There were a lot of really great movies that we probably wouldn't have considered to do on Genrevision. But before we do that, we have a couple of other criteria we want to get out of the way. We'll start with you, Travis. I think you have a couple performances from 2019 that you wanted to highlight.
It's more than a couple. I'm just going to go through them pretty quickly. First one is Fatma Mohammed. She plays an employee at a dress shop in a movie called In Fabric. I think her performance is one of my absolute favorites of the year, probably. It is just so wickedly funny and very beautifully deadpan. She plays a similarly interesting character in Peter Strickland's prior movie called Duke of Burgundy. She plays, I think she's a toilet salesperson.
Okay.
It's a pretty funny role. But yeah, she kills this freaking role. I love seeing her in it. She's probably one of the best things about the movie. There are some other good performances in it. But yeah, Fatma Mohammed in Fabric. The next performance I'd like to talk about is James McAvoy for Glass. Can't argue that this is a great performance. I mean, it's actually more than one great performance. It's a bunch of great performances because he plays a bunch of interesting characters. Mm-hmm. And you can tell just from his switches in body language and posture which character he's playing. It is remarkable work. And the fact that we're not talking about that aspect of Glass a little bit more at the end of the year kind of bums me out because there are some really fantastic aspects to that film. I understand that it was kind of an antagonistic film and a really bleak film that I think disappointed a lot of people. But McAvoy was one of the best things about those movies, those Split and Glass movies that Shyamalan did. Just incredible, incredible work from him.
Go listen to our Glass episode.
Next up is Awkwafina in The Farewell. She's an awesome lead in this movie. she gets some of the most raw and heartbreaking stuff. Even though the movie doesn't get into like really, really deep drama, she has one scene where she confronts some family members about the fact that they left China when they were really young, and she really pours her heart out in that scene. I have to give it to her. I think she just kicks total ass. Billie Lourd in Booksmart. She plays a character that is a complete wild card character in that film. Every time she shows up, she changes the scene for the better. She's just this force of like positive chaos that introduces a cool new element every single time, whether it be hallucinogens or other things. She was absolutely hilarious, and I look forward to seeing more Billie Lourd in comedies because I think she kicked ass. Willem Dafoe in The Lighthouse. Nobody did monologues like Willem Dafoe this year. He just nailed every single one of them. Watching The Lighthouse recently, again with Robert Eggers' commentary, sort of confirms just how much commitment there was in that role from Willem Dafoe. And I admire every second of it. A lot of people will go for Rob Pattinson for acting in that film, and I do agree that Pattinson gives an astounding performance as well, but for me it's Dafoe. Next up, every adult in the main cast of Parasite. Enough said.
Yeah. No, you'll hear no argument from me.
Florence Pugh as Danny in Midsommar. She plays a character who is absolutely at the end of a rope, dealing with mental illness and dread and grief. She handles all of it so well that I'm looking forward to seeing her in pretty much anything she does. I mean, I knew she was going to be good when I first saw her in the movie called Lady Macbeth. You saw that too.
Yeah, and she was by far one of my favorite things about that movie.
And I think she's going to continue to be our favorite things about a whole bunch of movies coming up. I think she's someone to really look forward to. She's going to have a really bright future, I believe. All right, Rebecca Ferguson in Dr. Sleep. Nobody is camping and vamping it up like her in this year. She makes a really goofy role into something really delicious and substantial.
Yeah, I can see Rose the Hat becoming an iconic horror movie villain, and a lot of that has to do with Ferguson.
I think she imbues the role with a lot of vulnerability. You know, it's supposed to be this really powerful character, this really seductive character, but she gives it a humanity that I think the character in the novel was lacking. The character in the novel was just this sort of fantasy vampire who wore a top hat. In the film, even though the film is surprisingly faithful to the novel, she really does so much with the character that surprised me. I'm absolutely here for Rebecca Ferguson. She's going to play Lady Jessica in the new Dune movie that we're getting this year. So
perfect.
Yeah. Constance Wu and Jennifer Lopez in Hustlers. These two play one of my favorite on-screen pairs of the year. Constance Wu is the protagonist of the film, and there is a scene where Jennifer Lopez's character does this incredible dance set to Fiona Apple's Criminal that is one of the most astounding performances, I think, of the year, not just because it's sexy, but because of the attention that the filmmaker Lorene Scafaria paid to setting up the dynamic between them, this dynamic of admiration. The reaction shots from Constance Wu as she's looking at Jennifer Lopez during that scene are just beautiful, beautiful close-up work. Anyway, Samara Weaving as the lead in Ready or Not.
Yes.
She was intensely charismatic and very funny, and exactly the lead that movie needed. As it leans more into horror and comedy throughout the running time, I think she handles everything with a real deft hand. Just loved her at every turn. And then I think one of the most delicious performances of the year is Mark Dacascos in John Wick 3.
Yeah.
He plays Zero, the assassin who is kind of the big bad of the film, but his final fight with John Wick, where he sort of reveals himself to be like the biggest John Wick fanboy ever, is one of the most satisfying and funny action scenes I'd seen the entire year. It was better than anything in John Wick 2, which is not a bad film, but I think John Wick 3 is going to come up again a little bit later. So next up, the three leads in Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. All three of them, of course, we have our main duo of Leo and Brad. Not enough credit, and I think not enough screen time, is given to Margot Robbie as Sharon Tate. Her one scene in the movie theater where she is watching herself on screen in that, I forget what the name of the movie is, that ski lodge.
The Wrecking Crew.
The Wrecking Crew, that's right. So the scene where she's sitting in the theater and watching The Wrecking Crew, I think, is one of the most heartfelt scenes in Tarantino's career. His tenderness, I think, shows through in that scene, which is odd considering like just how not tender that movie eventually goes. but that scene where she gets out of the movie theater and all the lights of Hollywood are on around her, the sun has gone down while she's in the movie theater. It's pure magic, and it's driven by an incredible performance. All right, Robert Forster and El Camino.
R.I.P.
R.I.P. The ensemble cast of Knives Out. You and I have had our issues with Knives Out. I still think it's a good movie. The cast is one of the absolute best things about it. The way they all work together is pure dynamite.
Agree.
Alessandro Nivola in The Art of Self-Defense. He plays Sensei, who is one of the funniest, most absurd villains. This movie frickin' rocks. You're going to hear about it later. But holy shit, does he do incredible things in this role. I did not expect this performance from him. I really never had a great read on who Alessandro Nivola was as a performer. But when I saw him in his tiny little role in The Neon Demon, I knew that he had some camp value in him. I knew that he could get a little bit wacky, because mostly I just knew him as the sidekick dude from Jurassic Park 3.
Sure. We're going to talk about Art of Self-Defense. Don't you worry.
Anyway, next up, Patrick Wilson for In the Tall Grass.
Gotta love that stash.
Yeah, he has an incredible mustache in that film, but also he takes dialogue from that book that I thought could never be read by any human and make it sound interesting or good.
That's a good point.
And he turns it into gold. Mads Mikkelsen in Arctic. He doesn't have a whole lot of dialogue in the film, but he really commands the screen as this pilot who is stranded, crashed in the Arctic, and most of his performance in the film is movement and action and silent reaction shot. It's a really hypnotic performance and a very good film. Next up, Lupita Nyong'o and Tim Heidecker for Us.
Yeah, we'll talk about that later. Trust me.
We shall. And then the last performance I wanted to talk about was Jete Lawrence for Pet Sematary. This is one of the best child performances I think I've seen in the whole decade.
I could get on board with that train.
Pet Sematary has its issues. I think it's a decent flick, but she takes this character that was reinvented for this film and really makes it her own. Creepy kid movies tend to kind of fall into a pattern. I think it's a really boring subgenre most of the time, but she's doing stuff with it that I think reinvigorates the creepy kid subgenre.
Mm-hmm. She's
able to take that and sort of embody all these fears that Pet Sematary tries to bundle up. It's a complicated story about grief and, the inability to tell your children the bad news about what happens to us when we die. It is that fear, I think, made flesh really, really, really well. And Jete Lawrence just carries the performance beautifully. Okay, that's all the acting awards that I want to give out for now. What's next?
Well, here on Genre Vision, we do not do worst of the year stuff. I think that's just not worth anybody's time. Instead, I have a couple movies that I usually it's just one, but this year had a handful of what I call the WTF movies of the year. These are movies that defy any human rating scale. The first one is Cats, directed by Tom Hooper. It's the horror show that everybody has made it out to be, but it is a true vision of a movie. It's a nightmare vision, and it's a digital hellscape that I've never witnessed before. But I still think about it. There's still choices in that movie that haunt me. And that's kind of brilliant. I mean, it's not good. And I think Cats as a show and as an idea is not worth anybody's time. But that movie, it deserves the discussion it's getting. And I think in the long run, it will end up being viewed as, one of the worst movies ever kind of thing, which is dumb because it genuinely is something that I will never forget. That's valuable to me.
Word.
The other one's Serenity, directed by Stephen Knight. This is starring Matthew McConaughey and Anne Hathaway. I won't spoil it for anybody who doesn't know. It's a bizarre tale that takes a really bizarre turn at a point and brings into question a lot of the movie's perspective on morality. It's a very warped, dark morality, but it's a gonzo movie. And again, it's a vision. I see the vision behind it. If that sounds like something that's even remotely intrigued you, I highly recommend seeing Serenity. And the last WTF movie of the year for me is The Fanatic, directed by Fred Durst. Spoiler alert, I do know that The Fanatic is on your honorable mentions list, Travis.
Yes.
The Fanatic is a movie that I think everybody wanted to turn, this is one of the so bad it's good, worst movies. I don't feel that way about it. It's a movie that continually I think about, and there are some bizarre choices and a whole arena of decisions, but it's a movie I've constantly thought about, and more so, it probably was one of the movies that had one of the biggest effects on me. By the time the ending came around, I was legitimately horrified, and I think that was what the movie was going for.
Yep. Is that all of your WTF movies?
Yep, that's it.
Okay,
So
great. So that can actually take us right into my honorable mentions, because I will mention, The Fanatic. It is one of the year's most fascinating exercises in bad taste. So many distasteful choices in one screenplay that it's kind of unbelievable. So you have to see it to believe it.
It's unique. There's nothing else I've ever seen like it.
Yeah, I mean, there's, just like you said, there's stuff in this movie that I'm still thinking about. And bizarrely, there is some stuff in this film, I think, that is of substance. It is substantial. It's not an insubstantial film. Mm-hmm. It's not a waste of time. It's not a write-off. Is it in extraordinarily poor taste? You bet. But it's not nearly as in poor taste as, like, Human Centipede or Serbian Film or other, like, trash exploitation cinema. This is something that, I mean, had you and I laughing a lot, so there are certainly comedic elements to it, knowingly comedic elements to it. Like, Fred Durst is not unaware of humor. He certainly has a sense of humor. The movie ends up being sort of a bizarre love story between Fred Durst and Fred Durst. So it is, I think, a little narcissistic. But, vanity projects tend to be like that. And I also think this movie is not unaware that it's a vanity project. So fascinating experience. Oddly, I recommend it, but not for everybody. Okay. Next up for me on honorable mentions is In Fabric. I mentioned that Fatma Mohammed put in an incredible performance in this movie. I've talked about it a little bit more recently in the extended Currently Consuming we did, but Peter Strickland, the director of Barbarian Sound Studio and Duke of Burgundy, and then also a segment in one of the recent anthology films. What was that? The Field Guide to Evil. Mm-hmm. This guy is one of the best stylists, I think, that's working in independent horror today. In Fabric, I think, would have been better served, but maybe a different format. Like, if it had been a 2-part Shudder series, or hell, a 3-part or even 6-part Shudder series, I would have watched the hell out of that. But as it's like 2-part anthology film, it's really really unevenly weighted, I should say. That first part of the 2 stories is much, much better than the second. And not for, any big stylistic drop off. It just tells a better story until it's time for that story to end and transition to the next one. So I still think it's worth a watch for anybody who likes Peter Strickland's other stuff, like Barbarian Sound Studio or Duke of Burgundy. I think style is certainly not a problem. In fact, it's the opposite of a problem. It's an extraordinary asset that the film has. Next up is Arctic, directed by Joe Penna, starring Mads Mikkelsen. I mentioned this when I spoke about his performance. It really is driven by that performance, but there is some incredible wilderness survival stuff in this film that's just done beautifully. It's a really, really simple movie. No big sense of style to it. It's just polished and doesn't have any pretense about it. It's simple, it's to the point, and doesn't overstep any boundaries. It's quite good, and I recommend anybody who's interested in wilderness survival films or Mads Mikkelsen to see it. Next up, Daniel Isn't Real. Daniel Isn't Real is directed by Adam Egypt Mortimer. Are we going to be talking about this film later?
No, it is in my honorable mentions.
Okay. So Daniel Isn't Real is a psycho thriller horror film about a young man who has an imaginary friend as a child. And after the imaginary friend tells him to do something really awful, his mom asks him to put the imaginary friend away. And through a really interesting mental process, the imaginary friend goes away, but resurfaces in this young man's college age years. And trying to figure out this imaginary friend, Daniel, is the central conflict of the movie. And my God, is this thing stylish.
Absolutely. I finished watching it today, and it's got incredible polish, incredible style, and is just a really good little original horror movie. All
right. Next up is In the Tall Grass, which was a Netflix original. It is an adaptation of a Stephen King and Joe Hill novel, or a novella, really. It's pretty short. Because the novella is so short, the writer-director Vincenzo Natali had to expand on the material. And I think he does so in very, very smart ways. Ways that actually make the horror of the big grass field, which is the primary setting for the film, more of a cosmic horror. And it's also another exercise in poor taste. Like, there's some stuff in this movie that's absolutely horrific, definitely boundary pushing. But there's also some really striking imagery in it. You know, Vincenzo Natali, you know, from the time we saw Cube, when he kind of hit the scene with Cube, we knew that he was going to be somebody to contend with, you know, visually. And he continued to prove himself time after time again. I mean, he directed some incredibly handsome episodes of Hannibal. He's definitely somebody to continue to watch. All right, Scary Stories to Tell in the Dark. We reviewed this on a Patreon exclusive episode. It's an all-around solid teen horror movie, a supernatural horror movie. It has some of the most inventive scare scenes of the year. There is a scene involving Harold the Scarecrow that is, I think, one of the best death scenes of the year.
Yeah.
Totally shocking, very stylish, and surprisingly political. I think the film has quite a bit of guts to it. I was really surprised by it. Next up is Toy Story 4. I did not expect to enjoy this movie nearly as much as I did, but it actually does a really commendable job of taking a franchise that I had thought was like wrapped up, done, and adding this coda to it that acts as a really thoughtful farewell. It's also one of the most interesting movies of the year from a cinematographic standpoint. They really pushed the lens emulation in this film to use different styles of lenses to suit different kinds of shots and certain kinds of moods and for certain characters. It was really striking the way that they did that. And definitely a reason to see Toy Story 4. Next up is Fast Color. I think you'll talk about this more, so I'm just going to skip any description. Missing Link. This is the movie from Laika about Bigfoot. It is, oddly enough, the best Indiana Jones movie we've had since Last Crusade. It follows the Indiana Jones template with some interesting twists on the characters. And like every other Laika film, is so well put together and very charming. It has an incredible action sequence, actually. One of my favorite action sequences of the year is in this movie. It's a scene on the ship. All right, Pet Sematary. From the guys who did Starry Nights, Pet Sematary is a worthy revisit, I think, of the material because of that big change. And the big change, if you don't know, is they kill a different kid in the film. And thematically, I think it actually makes more sense. It's driven by good performances all around, Jete Lawrence being the obvious standout. But Jason Clarke and Amy Seimetz and John Lithgow certainly put in good work. The film is a little too breezy, a little too fast-paced. I think it needed to sit a little bit more and kind of marinate in that melodrama. Other than that, it's a really interesting revisit of Stephen King's novel. El Camino. I thought El Camino was extraordinarily well put together. I don't think it's an essential film, but I really like its measured pace and its ability to, I think, restrict its perspective to a single character and really just provide a really thoughtful elegy and a coda for that one character. It's certainly not an essential piece of the fabric that is Breaking Bad, and it's not like Breaking Bad enough, I think, to feel like an extended episode. It kind of separates itself and creates its own identity. I admired that a lot about it. Ready or Not. Is it the best horror comedy of the year?
We'll talk about that later.
It's quite good. It's directed by a couple of guys who go by the moniker Radio Silence. They weren't credited as Radio Silence for the film, but they were really promising when I first saw their haunted house segment of the first VHS film. They've since continued to build on that, and they put in a hell of a good time with this flick. It's kind of a must-see for the year, I think. If you like horror comedies, Ready or Not is definitely one to see. Knives Out. I think I've said pretty much all I want about Knives Out. It's an honorable mention. I think it's quite a good film. Obviously, we had our issues with it, but good enough to end up on my honorable mentions. Under the Silver Lake. This movie is another exercise in bad taste. Like, there's so much in this movie that's kind of repugnant and ugly and greasy. And it's overlong and I think a little overly indulgent artistically. And it's a little in love with the director's prior output. But I didn't stop thinking about this movie all year. I kept returning to moments and images from it. It also has one of the best scores of the year by Disasterpiece. He wrote a full orchestral score for the film. There are just so many standout elements in the movie that I could not leave it off my honorable mentions list. Also on my list are Uncut Gems and Tigers Are Not Afraid. Tigers Are Not Afraid is directed by Issa Lopez. It's a Mexican film. You can find it on Shudder. And that is all I got for honorable mentions.
Well, I have way too many to talk about stuff, so consider this as far as ranking numbers 53 to 16 in my top films of the year. In Fabric, directed by Peter Strickland. Annabelle Comes Home, directed by Gary Dauberman. Lucky Day, directed by Roger Avery. Anyara, directed by Hugo Lilia and Pella Kagerman. Sweetheart, directed by J.D. Dillard. Brightburn, directed by David Yarovesky. The Hole in the Ground, directed by Lee Cronin. Knives Out, directed by Ryan Johnson. Missing Link, directed by Chris Butler. Pokemon Detective Pikachu, directed by Rob Letterman.
That was almost on my honorable mentions.
Hey, that's what I'm here for. Glass, directed by M. Night Shyamalan. The Pool, directed by Ping Lumpraplong. I don't know how to say that last name, but...
Yeah, I valiant attempt. Thanks for taking a flying leap at it.
Starfish, directed by A.T. White. The Golden Glove, directed by Fatih Akin. Knife and Heart, directed by Yan Gonzalez. Harpoon, directed by Rob Grant. Satanic Panic, directed by Chelsea Stardust. Villains, directed by Robert Olson and Dan Burke. The Amazing Jonathan documentary, directed by Ben Berman. Toy Story 4, directed by Josh Cooley. Under the Silver Lake, directed by David Robert Mitchell. Shazam, directed by David F. Sandberg. Booksmart, directed by Olivia Wilde. Dragged Across Concrete, directed by S. Craig Zoller. Child's Play, directed by Lars Klevberg. Avengers Endgame, directed by Anthony and Joe Russo. Pet Cemetery, directed by Kevin Kolsch and Dennis Widmeyer. In the Tall Grass, directed by Vincenzo Natali. Scary Stories to Tell in the Dark, directed by Andre Overdahl. Freaks, directed by Zach Lipovsky and Adam B. Stein. El Camino, directed by Vince Gilligan. The Perfection, directed by Richard Shepard. And yes, Joker, directed by Todd Phillips, is in my honorable mentions. Ad Astra, directed by James Gray. Daniel Isn't Real, directed by Adam Egypt Mortimer. Came really close to cracking that top 15. Hustlers, directed by Lorene Scafaria. Little Monsters, directed by Abe Forsyth. And Uncut Gems, directed by Josh and Benny Safdie. Uncut Gems is just under it's number 16. I really liked that movie.
My honorable mentions, I should say, are not numbered.
Sure. But that's, if you want to talk more about any of those particular movies, please go to the comment section for this episode on genrevision.com. We'd be happy to go into detail about any of the specific ones. But it is finally time for the top 15 of 2019. And we're going to start things off with you, Travis. What's your number 15 movie?
My number 15 of 2019 is Ad Astra. I didn't really know what to expect from the film other than that it was kind of Interstellar adjacent. It seemed to be a serious man goes to space to solve a problem movie, which seems sort of expected, and I waited on it. I rented it when it hit VOD, and yet I found myself consistently surprised throughout the movie by different turns it would take. It's episodic. It's kind of a Heart of Darkness format. There's one turn in the film that totally sold me on it, though. I'm not going to spoil it here because I found it so utterly shocking and joy-inducing that it really had to end up on my list. As a production, I think it's handled really, really well. It's kind of adjacent to how Denis Villeneuve does things. There's a lot of monochromatic lighting, but in doing so, I think it finds really beautiful ways
it's gorgeous
to put those images together. Yeah, there's a big section of the film on Mars where there's a cameo, one of my favorite cameos of the year from Natasha Lyonne.
Yeah.
I think there's a whole bunch of people that aren't going to like this one because it doesn't really offer, I think, a whole lot of space action that people might like. Like even people who liked Interstellar might not like this.
This is way more introspective.
Yeah, more meditative, I would guess, is a good word for it. Introspective, sure. But yeah, I really ended up having a much better time with it than I thought I would. And it pushes a few boundaries that I thought it would never, ever approach. So Thank you, Ad Astra, for being a little bit weirder than I ever thought you were going to be. Drew, what is your number 15?
My number 15 is The Irishman, directed by Martin Scorsese. Scorsese.
Scorsese.
Yeah, I know a lot of people might be like, 15, it's Scorsese, you know, it's the freaking master work. It's like, it is. It's great. It really feels like an elegy from him for the kind of movies he was known for making, the performance, but it's not that same rote crime movie thing that everybody expects from him and his kind of movies. This is very somber, very sad. The last 20, 30 minutes or so are incredibly heartbreaking, and I think drive home the point of Scorsese does not idolize these characters. If he pities them, he feels sad for them, but he's not saying that they're good people. It's full of wonderful performances. As always, as a director, he's just at the top of his game, and it's all there on the screen. Even for someone like you, Travis, who I know like crime stories, mafia stuff, that's not really your cup of tea, I'd still recommend seeing this.
Yeah, I still plan on seeing it. I just haven't found the time to devote to watch that 3.5-hour epic. Also, my Netflix subscription is not active right now, so I'll get there. I'm just not in a rush.
Yeah, no rush. And it is, I will say, for as long as it was like the best kind of movie where I wasn't looking at the timestamps, I wasn't thinking about it. I was just sitting with the movie the entire time.
It's a good sign.
That is a good sign. All right, what's your number 14, Travis?
My number 14 is Dr. Sleep.
Oh, that is my number 10.
Oh, shit.
I cannot wait to watch Dr. Sleep again.
And when we do watch it again, there's going to be a longer cut to watch, which kind of blows my mind because the movie's already pretty long. It already feels like a director's cut. It really does feel like we got a vision on the screen of, you know, what Mike Flanagan intended for the film. But yeah, I'm definitely interested to watch it again. I'd like to see what Flanagan thought should have been included in the film. But as such, like Dr. Sleep, it feels like a really complete vision. He is using some of the same look and some of the same rules that he did for Haunting of Hill House. But for a movie that had such a legacy to try to live up to and so many dangerous elements to use, I mean, you know, it was using these elements from Kubrick's The Shining in a way that could have been sacrilegious to people. And I think it did turn off some people, the fact that this movie used these elements in the way that it did. But I found it always exciting to watch, you know, when the movie was sort of defining its own identity and not doing things that were at all related to The Shining stylistically. It was still exciting, and I really liked the way that it defined the relationships between its characters. This is another kind of iffy Stephen King novel that turned into a surprisingly good movie.
Yeah, go listen to our Dr. Sleep episode. I mean, it, even though, you know, it's your number 14, mine number 10, this is still best of the year, and I really think time is going to be nothing but kind to it.
Agreed. What is your number 14?
My number 14 is Crawl, directed by Alexander Aja. I don't care if it's as simple and directly, you know, a Drew Nip kind of movie. The older I get, I realize that doing what appears to be a very simple movie is oftentimes way harder than big, complex, blockbustery or visionary type things. Crawl is a great example of this kind of movie you can still make today, and you can still do it in a really enjoyable and exciting way.
You just have to shoot it in Romania.
Sure, Romania for Florida. But there's just so many. I think one of the things that happened in 2019, a term that would be on the Genre Vision bingo card, is functional. Travis and I have used functional sometimes in a slightly dismissive way. And considering some of the films that we've had to watch over the course of our lives, functionality escapes a lot of films and filmmakers. And Crawl, there are elements of it like the drama between the father and daughter that are functional, but that's not bad. It means it works.
It does work. And as far as animal attack movies go, Crawl's pretty good. It actually, I think, barely missed my honorable mentions list. But go listen to our FinFlix episode on it. Crawl's a good time.
I had an absolute blast with it. All right, what's next up for you, Travis?
Next up for me in the number 13 spot is The Farewell, directed by Lulu Wang. This is one of those good-hearted family dramas that tells an interesting story, one I hadn't really heard before. It doesn't follow a familiar template, and it was about a culture that I don't have a lot of familiarity with. So it was something that felt true, and I found it extremely informative. And it's a curious little story about the way that we deal with death in families, and the way that we deal with grief. Oddly enough, it makes it an interesting counterpoint to Pet Sematary. I really appreciate the kind of perspective that we get from The Farewell. And the performances, of course, are fantastic. Lulu Wang's direction, even though she really hadn't made a name for herself as a filmmaker before this, her direction is astounding. I mean, for somebody who doesn't have a huge, long track record as a filmmaker, some of her lighting in this is like nothing short of like Wong Kar-wai good. Like,
wow.
Some of the things, the way that it's staged is just awesome. And yet it never reaches too far, never gets too ambitious, but it is something that I think is really tenderly put together. It's funny. The dialogue is really well written. Yeah, I definitely recommend this for pretty much anybody. What is in your 13 spot?
My number 13 is going to be a very different kind of movie. John Wick 3 Parabellum, directed by Chad Stahelski.
This is in my number 10 spot.
Wow. I mean, John Wick 2, like you said earlier, it's not a bad movie, but I adore the original John Wick. It may be one of my all-time favorite action movies.
I like the first John Wick, and I thought John Wick 2 was kind of bloated and overlong, had some great stuff in it. John Wick 3 knocked me on my fucking ass, though.
The first film was so streamlined and so simple, and I think that was part of what made it catch on. The second one really had to try and build the world out, and while it did that, I think in doing that, its reach exceeded its grasp. And John Wick 3 managed to learn the lessons of world building from 2 and reconfigure it while also having a much better streamlined story, which is just everybody's out to get John Wick. And I think that actually allowed them to do more natural world building by having John have to go to different places to get help. So we learn more about his backstory, about other people that he's had dealings with. And when all's said and done, when we were watching John Wick movies, we're watching it for action. And the action in this movie is nothing short of landmark in some sequences.
Indeed. Also, this is by far the funniest John Wick film. Like, John Wick 2 had its really funny moments, like when he and Common are shooting each other in the train station.
Best part of that movie.
Yeah, hilarious. This movie has moments like that every few minutes. I mean, really delightful. An absolute joy to watch.
I mean, and just in concept, I mean, when he is in what is essentially a museum of knives.
Yeah.
Like, and you just see all the knives immediately. I just started laughing and getting giddy. And that knife fight is phenomenal.
It's fucking legendary. It's so good.
All right. What's next up for you in the number 12 spot?
Number 12 for me is horror noir.
This rated even higher for me. This is in my number 7 spot.
Wow. Good.
I think this is the movie from 2019 I've seen the most times. Now, granted, some of that I did fall asleep because it was just something I put on at night to go to bed. But because it was a fascinating retrospective on the American horror genre through Black perspective and Black history. And like any good documentary about movies, I came away with a bunch of movies I knew I needed to see, which bonus there. But also, it's got great flow. It's structured kind of naturalistically, like, okay, we're going to go as chronologically as we can. But the perspectives and the insights into not only films I wasn't aware of, but films I have held dear, like Candyman, I gained brand new reads on that movie that I never would have been able to have. And that's like the most invigorating thing for me when it comes to talking about film is hearing perspectives that I can't have.
Sure. Horror noir covers an extraordinarily broad topic, but does so very, very well. Covers a lot of ground without being overlong. I really would have watched a 6-episode series of this.
Yeah.
This was a really fascinating way to examine horror because it's a way of examining horror that I never could have done myself. So having these new perspectives really allows me to see things from different angles and, helps me gain a little bit more knowledge. Just the fact that somebody watched Alien versus Predator and really loved the fact that it had a black woman in the lead role. It's like, I really appreciate that person enjoyed that experience and felt represented in that experience. Like, it's great. It adds a little bit more of enjoyment to the film for me. So it was nice to be able to share the kind of joy and even apprehension at times about certain horror films that we see in horror noir. So a definite must see for the year. All right. Let's see. What's next in your number 12 spot?
My number 12 is Ready or Not, directed by Matt Bettinelli-Olpin and Tyler Gillette. Or I think on screen it does say a radio silence film, but they should get all the credit because, man, this is one slick looking movie that it's one of those movies that cost, I don't know, maybe like $5 million or something, and it looks 3 times as expensive.
Yeah, I think they picked a really, really good location to shoot in primarily.
I mean, that's spending your money wise and making it look like a lot more, but it is funny. It's, again, another one of these movies where it seems like it would be very simple. It's a very simple little story, but doing that is really, really difficult because if you don't have the right players, if you don't have the right rhythm, one little missing screw, one loose screw rather, can topple the entire enterprise. Ready or Not fires on all cylinders. It's funny. It's horrific. It's got some real genuine emotional beats in it that I think help solidify it as more than just a lark. And it might have maybe the best ending of the year, maybe at least.
It has a great ending.
One of the most entertaining.
Yeah, the writing is just razor sharp. There are some one-liners in this film that I thought were just some of the best of the year. Yeah, it's definitely a must-see. And for sure, like I said, the best horror comedy.
Yep, for you, what's number 11?
Us.
11's appropriate considering the use of the number 11 in this. For me, I think it's appropriate considering it's about doppelgangers, and it's my number 2 movie of the year.
Ooh, wow, nice.
I adore this movie. I really think, maybe more so than Get Out, Us is really trying to carve a place in horror iconography that is brazenly original.
Yeah, I mean, it is a visionary film. I think a lot of people like to rail on Peele, but he's definitely bringing a really solid vision to this film. And while I think the mythology of the film is sort of knowingly muddled, the film is more thematically complex than Get Out. It's about more things. It involves more elements. It feels topical, but in ways that I think that are endlessly dissectable. Even though the messaging is vague, it doesn't really blunt the effect of the film. It's still an incredibly effective movie. Even when you just look at the sort of central dynamic between the two main characters played by Lupita Nyong'o, Red and Adelaide, like that's the dynamic that really propels the entire film.
I don't know. I didn't do best performances, but there's no question that Lupita Nyong'o as Red and Adelaide is in contention for the performance of the year for me.
Yeah. And then, of course, our boy Tim Heidecker,
oh, man.
He really swings for the fences.
And has one of the best, kind of darkest laughs in the movie.
Elizabeth Moss, too. She has a couple great moments.
Winston Duke is hilarious.
Yeah.
And great. This is a movie that I think, when I think about the mystery box approach to storytelling and how I think that's often mishandled and not really done justice, this is like a good example of that. It's giving you these things that it doesn't have all the answers for, that it's just this kind of weird mythology, and there's all these symbols and images, and what do they mean, and they invite dissection and discussion.
The biggest thing it implies is that there is an existence of a divine presence in the film, even though we never see it and it's not directly involved in any of the goings on. But it does appear that some sort of divine story, some big divine narrative is at play. And Red and Adelaide are two big players in that divine narrative.
And even beyond all this, I think it's just a really fun, effective little family horror movie.
Sure, it's loaded with good moments.
All right, I'll do my number 11. Fast Color. which made your honorable mentions. This is, I mentioned a tweet where we had two great X-Men movies come out this year. They just weren't called X-Men. One is Freaks, that I mentioned in my honorable mentions, and the other is Fast Color. This is what I like about what we would consider, quote, superhero stories. We only say that because we have a longevity and a legacy of these kind of stories being connected to comic books and superheroes. This is just a nice little science fiction fantasy story.
Yeah, it has kind of an inauspicious beginning, but it eventually goes to a place that I found absolutely joyous. You know, it's definitely a low-budget film, but it ends up making the most of what it had, you know, especially driven by Gugu Mbatha-Raw, who's
great. Anchors the movie.
Yeah, she's proven herself to be a really valuable performer. But yeah, it's an interesting film about superpowers and what it means to this particular family that the film centers around. The depiction of how their superpowers work on film is like nothing short of fascinating.
It is. It's really interesting the way the powers have a thematic connection to these characters' stories. Mm-hmm. And the ending, there's supposedly going to be a TV series. I pray it happens, because the ending of this movie made me just want to cheer.
Yeah, it's like a joyous ending. Also, David Strathairn is in it?
Yeah, low-key great. You just put him in and bam.
I didn't expect him to show up, and then all of a sudden David Strathairn showed up. Like, oh shit, all right, okay, yeah, another great addition to an already solid cast.
Instant production value.
Mm-hmm.
All right, well, since we've done our number 10s, let's move on. What's your number 9?
The Standoff at Sparrow Creek.
Well, that is actually my number 9 as well.
No shit. Number 9. Number 9.
This is a movie that we've talked about privately where there's a political read of this movie, and, you know, this is from Cinestate, and they have garnered a reputation of sorts.
I don't know if it's necessarily that there is a political read of the film. It is a political film.
It is. Well, but even so, the political reads of this film have been short-sighted. I think what you and I have talked about in private about our kind of takes on the movie and how it is actually a lot, I think, grimmer and bigger than one particular angle.
For me, it's not so much about politics as it is about masculinity and men. You know, the fact that it sets itself in this world of gun-toting right-wing militia members and ex-cops and current cops and those kinds of people, like the fact that it sets itself in that world is kind of what Green Room did when it set itself amidst the punk music and white supremacist backdrop. It's a similar vibe to that. I think Standoff at Sparrow Creek, the one thing that I think might not age well, and it's kind of in line with what the rest of Cinestate does. It's, you know, it's kind of a Zoller kind of thing where characters have these big, long, theatrical, very stagey monologues. That might not age the best, but the characters all have interesting things to say. The lighting in the film is fucking fantastic.
Well, that's why I want to talk. This is directed by Henry Dunham, and this is an example of a movie where you need to show people you can do a lot with a little. A lot that this movie does is utilizing its lighting to, again, make it seem like a much shinier, polished production than it actually is when you get down to the nuts and bolts.
Yeah, and the fact that the central performance from James Badge Dale is so good, you know, really anchors the movie around his character.
It's a good ensemble.
Yeah, there's a great mystery at play there. You know, and it always kind of opens itself up to the idea that there could be something more going on. And so it's driven by that idea that there could be something out there, almost like a 10 Cloverfield Lane kind of thing. You're convinced sometimes that you're like, what is going on out there in the world outside this militia compound?
Well, this is another example of my thesis of simple ideas are a lot harder to pull off than you think. This is an old standard. A bunch of people are trapped in a place and they have to figure something out. Mm-hmm. There's some problem externally or internally that they are stuck with in this location.
It's like The Thing.
Exactly. I mean, it's absolutely like The Thing. And I really think it's a tough movie because I think a lot of people aren't going to be able to see beyond its political feelings.
Well, and there's just some surface elements of it, you know, the whole right-wing militia thing that people are just going to find distasteful or just too unpleasant, like, to go there.
Right.
And I get that. Trust me, I get that. I was really apprehensive about watching the movie until I was like, it's a 99-cent rental. It's been well reviewed. I know people whose opinions I trust who've said the movie is good. I took a chance on it. And I ended up really, really liking what it did, especially from a cinematographic standpoint. My God, the lighting.
Yeah, this is one where whatever Henry Dunham does next, I'm on board. I think he shows incredible promise just as a director and understanding how to utilize a space and make it way more cinematic than it should have been.
Yep. All right. Number 8.
My number 8 is Dolomite Is My Name, directed by Craig Brewer. Man, I've watched this twice. I'm probably going to watch it a third time because it's just, it might be the feel-good movie of the year.
That sounds promising. Again, it's another thing that just I haven't watched because my Netflix subscription's not active.
Sure, but I mean, this is from the same writers who did Ed Wood, and it's somewhat in that same mold. They have a structure that they know is going to work. It's also not, like Ed Wood, it's not supposed to be taken as a completely factual account of Rudy Ray Moore's life. This is a biopic. It has a love of this man that is so wonderful. And Rudy Ray Moore was, as an artist, and his output was wonderful and comedic and fun. And at the end of the day, it's just stacked with great performances. Of course, the spotlight one being Eddie Murphy as Rudy Ray Moore. It's not just that Eddie Murphy is doing some of the best stuff that he's done in a long time, since he was in a lot of kind of throwaway bad movies. This is easily one of the best roles I've ever seen him in general. He is absolutely living for this performance. He is heartwarming, funny. Wesley Snipes as D'Urville Martin is so funny as this just not here for it director. It's a wonderful time. Like, just talking about it now, I'm like, man, I could watch it right now because it immediately will make me feel great. If you have any love of movies, and particularly low budget and true independent, make it your own way filmmaking, gotta see Dolomite Is My Name.
All right, my number 8 is The Lighthouse.
But wow, I'm surprised it's that low for you. The Lighthouse is my number 4.
Really? Okay, good. The Lighthouse is pretty much catnip for me and Drew. Like, you and I have to admit that right off the bat. We just love
sure.
salty sea stories, and this is firmly in our wheelhouse.
Let's make it clear here. When we do our top 15s, we're not trying to be, well, we'll objectively pick what we believe were the best films of the year. This is our shit.
Yeah.
And The Lighthouse is 100% our shit.
Well, you and I also grew up doing theater. Mm-hmm. This movie is very stagey. Big monologues back and forth, the kind of things. It's like, ooh, I would have done that in an audition.
Oh, good Lord. Yeah. I mean, when you were talking about Willem Dafoe, his Neptune monologue is immediately, I was like, man, if I was 16 again, like that would be my showcase monologue.
Well, and it would be so easy for the showiness of that kind of stuff to turn instantly sour in this movie, and yet it stays on the rails. Or actually, it goes off the rails in maybe a delightful way. By the time they're fucking drinking turpentine in the movie, you're like, oh boy.
Well, yeah, you can go listen to our episode on The Lighthouse where we just showered effusive praise on that movie, and I really think it deserves it. I admit that because of its setting and topic and everything, I like it more than Eggers' The Witch, but I also think it might be a better movie. I don't know.
The Witch still takes that cake for me in terms of that. I think The Witch is a much better film.
Fair enough. Number 7 for you is?
Oh, number 7 for me is Once Upon a Time in Hollywood.
Well, that's my number 1, baby. I can't think of another movie, looking at the movies on my list. There's one other movie, and we'll talk about it, where every time I've watched Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, I tear up towards the end. And it's not a big, showy, make the audience cry moment. It's a very tender, subtle moment between two guys just acknowledging their true friendship and their love. And it's crazy to me that is in a Quentin Tarantino movie.
Yeah, I think it has kind of revealed the deficit in his filmmaking. The fact that he, I think, is growing a little bit more sincere and a little more heartfelt in his age.
I'd say instead of sincere, he's outright. What's interesting is his film career, his sentimentality has been purely the texture of these kinds of films that he loves. And while that's peeked through in character work, I would say with Kill Bill and the bride's relationship with her daughter and Bill, I don't think he's ever excelled at genuine sentimentality in characters until Once Upon a Time in Hollywood.
Well, and I was worried after The Hateful Eight. I was like, is this guy just going to go full head on into like, this kind of like cynical, bitter posturing? Like, is that where we're going to go with this? And, I don't think Hateful Eight is a bad movie, but Once Upon a Time in Hollywood is such a 180 in terms of that kind of attitude. It really is a warm hug of a movie that has this sort of all-out violent climax that you might expect from a Tarantino film. But and I think a lot of people were sort of thrown for a loop by that. And then I think also a lot of viewers were kind of waiting for that stuff to break out all along. And then when it did, it was cathartic. I mean, my audience, I didn't see a movie this year or maybe even last year that had the audience laughing this hard.
I will say it was definitely my best audience experience, where everybody was on the same wavelength. We were all laughing or cheering or at the right moments. And I really think one of the best scenes of the year is just Cliff and Rick sitting down and watching an episode of FBI together.
Yeah, no, it's actually again another deficit I think we see, is the exploration of male friendships on film. I like the genuineness and the casualness of how far it'll go to show their bond, but the fact that they don't talk about the nature of their bond throughout so much of the movie is kind of painful and indicative of like how men approach their friendships, which, I think there are some obvious social deficits in the way that men relate to one another usually.
Well, again, go listen to our episode on Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. I again, just talking about it, I want to watch it again. But I think looking here, we've once again synced up with our number 6 movies.
So what was your number 7 again?
My number 7 was horror noir, and number 6 for both of us is Midsommar.
That's right. Midsommar is another home run from A24's sort of art house horror department.
Ari Aster, is 2 for 2 in my book.
For sure. And this is a very different film. One that's set in a sort of, technicolor daylight, constantly on the verge of being too bright. But its exploration of mental illness is probably one of the best I've seen in, fucking 20 years. It's remarkably effective just as an exploration of mental illness. But the fact that it does that and everything else so good is pretty astounding. If I had one complaint about it, is that it's a little too long.
Interesting. Okay. I know. Didn't he put out a director's cut too?
He did, and one of these days I'm going to watch it because I'm just a sucker for alternate cuts. But, it's like Dr. Sleep. I'm like, that movie was already really long.
No, but I don't feel those films' lengths to me with Midsommar or Dr. Sleep. Midsommar, again, you can go listen to our episode on it, but I think it's gorgeous, and I think making horror gorgeous, especially daylight horror, is incredible. Like, that's a really hard goal to set for yourself, and I think Midsommar not only meets that goal, but exceeds it.
It follows a familiar template only to a point. Like, it's a bunch of American college students go to a foreign country and slowly, start getting offed one by one. Like, we've seen that with Hostel. So there's that familiar structure there. But the way that this movie takes that familiar structure and does something wholly unexpected with it is like so awesome. So thank you, Ari Aster, for really fucking me up again.
All right. What's your number 5?
My number 5 is The Art of Self-Defense.
Here we get ready, loyal listeners. You're going to hear a lot of interchanging slots here. The Art of Self-Defense is my number 3.
Holy shit, this movie's good.
I mean, obviously in my ranking, it is the comedy of the year to me. I have not laughed so hard at any film this year, and there were a lot of good, funny moments and funny movies. But man, this movie and we just immediately hit on the same wavelength. It's a wonderful exploration, again, of masculinity, in this particular sense, toxic masculinity, and kind of stereotypes of what we as a culture perceive to be masculine.
Right. And it's talking about the idea that violence is one of the ultimate expressions of masculinity. Mm-hmm. And when someone uses violence upon you, it is emasculating. It takes away one's masculinity. And so you have this character played by Jesse Eisenberg, who is like the epitome, the epitome parody of I guess, a beta male, or what an asshole would call a cuck.
He is King Dweeb.
Oh, yeah.
And it's one, I mean, he plays it wonderfully. And when he decides to join this dojo and become, try and boost his feelings of masculinity, his his expression of that in his life is so funny. There's so many moments, when he tells his little dog that he's not going to pet him anymore, like, because he's been caught. It's so funny, but it's also there's genuine emotion. This is not just kind of a lark or a all-out parody.
It doesn't lose itself in its absurdity. I mean, it's absolutely an absurdist film, but it doesn't lose any sort of realness or sincerity in that.
And we got to mention Imogen Poots.
She's had a couple of really good performances this year. She's actually not bad at all in Black Mirror and Black Christmas, rather. But
no,
it's definitely my favorite role she's ever done, because she plays this sort of second in command at this karate dojo. It's this hard-ass performance that shows, I think, an incredible amount of vulnerability. Every single scene she has with Eisenberg is a delight to watch. And where her character eventually goes in the film is really delightful to see.
Yeah, I can't recommend that. It's a weird movie because it kind of takes place in a fictional world that's not, it's just left of center for us.
It's not speculative fiction, but the fact that the movie is absurd should let you know that, like, oh, okay, I have to approach this as an absurdist story.
It is, and I again, I want to watch it again now because I'm just remembering all the things that made me laugh.
This is written and directed by Riley Stearns, who wrote an incredible movie called Faults that came out a couple years ago, which was another story of sort of a broken, emasculated man, played in that movie by Leland Orser. If you haven't seen Faults, by the way, please see Faults. Anyway, what's your number 5, Drew?
My number 5 is Parasite, directed by Bong Joon-ho.
Parasite is my number 3.
Deservedly. I mean, it was going to rank high anyways. We can talk a little bit more about this because we didn't do an episode on it. Parasite, holy moly. I mean, it's been so fascinating to watch the evolution of Korean cinema's acceptance in the West, in the States and everything. And what's always fascinated me about it is these movies, they stay pretty consistently genre. The movies that really get picked up and heralded critically or even from kind of cult favorites. Parasite feels like the culmination of this that's been going on for, I don't know, almost a decade now, I feel. And Parasite feels like it's still unquestionably genre.
Yeah, well, I mean, back when the horrible Weinstein brothers were one of the primary forces in taking Korean films and distributing them in the United States, there was a sense of like, oh, the kinds of Korean films we would get here. And this, certainly falls in line with some of that stuff. Bong Joon-ho's movies have done well critically in the States for years. But Parasite, I don't know, it certainly feels genre in some ways. There are elements of horror in it or elements of thriller. It's a black comedy. It's a family drama. It's also incredibly funny. This had one of the biggest laughs of the year for me. There is a point in the film where I laughed so hard that I actually had to stop the film and cover my mouth because I didn't want to disturb my neighbors.
I mean, it really is incredibly fun. I think it's genre stuff. It reveals itself. It's not going to seem like it at first.
Yeah.
But that's what I love. It's kind of a genre mashup. There's a sequence in the movie and kind of the approach of the movie, which is this poor family is going to find a way to ingratiate themselves and get hired by this very rich family. It plays off like a heist movie.
Yeah, the fact that they weasel themselves into this rich family's life so that they can themselves have a better life is an incredible class commentary. Again, so sharply written. It has such a unique voice to it as well.
Where the movie goes and how crazy it gets is continually surprising. It's horrifying. It's funny. It's tragic. It's moving. It's a movie that I can already tell is going to cement itself, and deservedly so. And I hope only opens more doors for the kinds of Korean cinema that we get wide access to.
All right. So that is your number 5. Do I do my number 4 now?
What's your number 4? My
number 4 is Hustlers.
I made my honorable mentions, and I'm glad to see it rank so high for you. What a great movie.
Holy shit. Lorene Scafaria really laid it out in this one, didn't she? Boom. Chew on that, Scorsese.
Well, here's the thing. I've even made that comparison. I really don't think it's fair to compare these kind of movies because even though we'll say it's like, oh, it's a true crime narrative and everything, Lorene Scafaria has a totally different energy and a completely different approach and viewpoint on the characters she's playing with.
Sure. Nevertheless, the familiar structure is there where you have somebody who is narrating their prior life of crime.
For sure. And I think that's a little more direct in Hustlers because we have these framing devices of actually sitting with the characters during a different time in the future.
Mm-hmm.
I like that structure. I think it actually adds some interesting wrinkles to the story.
And actually, I think a necessary veracity, because if the movie were to just spend all of its time in like, you know, the past timelines, I think it would be easy to just sort of get wrapped up in the music video nature of it all. But the fact that it's grounded in a reality that we can recognize is extremely important. This is one of the most thoughtfully photographed movies of the year. And I think another one of the most thoughtfully edited films of the year. I think the editing job on this flick is nothing short of aces.
Agreed.
The way they move back and forth between the timelines, the way that they cut back and forth in dialogue scenes, like such attention paid to the rhythm of it, and also to, you know, when they'll cut to certain angles and close-ups. Like there's not a fucking ounce of coverage in this movie. It's all meticulously chosen shots. It's just so well put together. Thank you, Lorene Scafaria.
Yeah, I agree, you know, just from a cinematographic standpoint, it's a knockout. And when I say cinematographic, I don't just mean the shots. It is the cinema of it all, the editing, the pacing, the lighting, you know, add on top of this great performances and good writing. It's a great time. And it's a story that I feel is sadly still relevant, even though, you know, it takes place primarily almost over a decade ago.
Right. Well, it's, you know, still something we're feeling today. It's about the economic collapse in America in 2008 and the continued fallout from it.
It is another movie, much like Parasite, or, you know, about the throes of late stage capitalism.
Yeah. This has one of the most biting final lines, I guess, in any movie this year.
It's very poignant.
Yeah.
And it hits. I mean, I
don't want to make this movie seem like a bad time, though. It's a fucking great time.
It is. And I like the sentimentality that Scafaria shows for these characters. Unlike Scorsese movies, where I think the idolization of his characters comes more from the audience than him himself.
Agreed.
I think Scafaria really loved these women and saw things from their perspective.
Well, and it means something that these women share an extraordinarily strong bond between one another, and the way that we see that bond established through just reaction shots and incredible dialogue scenes. It's awesome. One
of my favorites is whenever I think it's their Christmas party, and Constance Wu's mother is there.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh, so funny. Like you think that scene's going to go a particular way, that it's going to be awkward or anything, but seeing it go the other way and it be incredibly heartwarming and her be part of the girl gang is so great.
Hustlers all the way. All right.
Well, we've burned through my mine. My number 4 was Lighthouse. Number 3 was Art of Self-Defense. Number 2 was Us, and number 1 was Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. So it's all you, Travis. Take us home.
All right. So my number 3 was Parasite, which we've covered. My number 2 is Apollo 11.
I gotta see this.
You haven't seen it yet. I can't believe you haven't seen it yet. It's one of the best uses of archival footage in a documentary I think I've ever seen. Holy shit, y'all. Apollo 11 is one of the most meticulously put together documentaries of the year, but certainly, you know, it's not just a technical marvel. Like the whole concept of the movie is they took all this old archival footage from the Apollo 11 mission and they restored it. And they didn't do some awful, horrible hack job of restoring it and trying to make it look fresh and new and digital. I'm going to talk about that in a few weeks. But, you know, they did an incredible job of making this stuff look, you know, like the sources. If it was shot on 16 millimeter, it looks like 16 millimeter film. But the way that it's all cut together creates this extraordinary narrative. And I don't believe it's narrated at all. It's just relying on the imagery of the period to tell this incredible story. The way that it puts you in the room with all these characters, for any scene, it's like, this is nothing short of wizardry. I mean, really the magic of cinema. And it's all true.
It really happened. Stanley Kubrick didn't film it in a soundstage.
My number one of the year is Booksmart.
Now, this is so fascinating. I mean, we talked about, but I find it really fascinating that our number ones are both, I think, movies about friendship, but very, very, very directly gendered. Like, and that I don't mean that just by like, you look at it, it's like, oh, one's about girls and one's about two guys. It's like, I think the movies themselves are exploring that very specifically. And that's kind of great.
Well, I'm also really shocked that it's a studio comedy, not because it was made by a big studio. It's an Annapurna movie. But the fact that it so closely follows the formula of like the raunchy studio comedy, like boggles my mind that this movie would have those familiar pieces of structure, those similar ideas to, I don't know, Blockers, which is also a pretty good movie, an excellent studio comedy, or even like Harold and Kumar, which is like a wacky, zany party movie. They're going from one place to another. The National Lampoon's kind of mentality.
Well, I think Booksmart, it all comes down, I won't say it all, but as far as escaping that kind of pack, it all comes down to treating that kind of movie with a direction that doesn't treat that movie like a lot of those disposable comedies are treated.
Well, it's direction. And Olivia Wilde does an awesome job with the direction on this. This
Fantastic.
is an exercise in good taste. She makes so many good choices. Like, she was really heavily involved in the music supervision on the film. So every needle drop in the film is really well chosen. And the soundtrack for the film is awesome. But it's driven by two great performances, Caitlin Dever and Beanie Feldstein. I should have mentioned Beanie Feldstein in my acting portion because she just fucking rocks.
Yeah, I think the two leads, you have to have them center the movie. But what's nice is that whereas the emotional beats in these kind of movies, usually in studio comedies, feel really forced or cliche, stock, Booksmart earns every emotional moment.
It does. Yeah, the relationship between the two characters is something that we understand immediately to have value. We understand that these characters are young. We understand that they're naive, and yet we still love them. They're exploring things that are contemporary and current in the way that Eighth Grade, the Bo Burnham movie certainly did, but it's doing so in a way I think that's less abrasive, but still sharp. You know what I mean? It's still sharply written. It's still observational in a way that feels good and it feels smart. I
mean, Booksmart was in my honorable mentions. I enjoyed it as a comedy. I enjoyed it as a piece of direction, like whatever Olivia Wilde does next, I'm tapped into. My only criticisms of Booksmart are not so much directly about the movie itself, but more like it makes high school like this really wonderful, crazy, good time, which we see in plenty of movies, but it's very, very kind. And also their high school, I think I said this before, is like, it's a very, this is the future liberals want kind of high school atmosphere. And
yeah, but it's also making a joke at that expense as well, because
you think so?
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, the film shows us these two young characters who, yes, they're feminists. Yes, they're very, very liberal, but it doesn't tell us that these things are wrong. What it's making criticism of is idealism. Their idealism is recognized as a flaw in the film. You see these two characters that believe if they study really, really hard and they neglect socialization with anyone outside of this very, very tight circle, that they're going to do the right thing. But in the end, their idealism betrays them. And I don't think criticizing younger generations, Gen Z in this particular case, criticizing them as idealistic is unwarranted.
I mean, it's idealistic to a cartoonish point, and I'm not saying that directly as a bad thing.
Well, a lot of people had bad experiences in high school, and I don't think that it invalidates this, but I think it sells its particular story about these characters in their school very, very well.
Okay, I like I said, it's just a thing where it's like, this is to a cartoonish point of positivity that I think is a little disingenuous, but it didn't, like you're saying, it never took away from the main character's journey and arc and their relationship, which I think is just the way the movie ends is perfect.
Yeah, it has a fantastic ending, has an interesting romance. I think the way that it The way that it talks about sex is very refreshing. It was the first and, well, probably the only movie of the year that as soon as it ended, I was like, I want to watch that again right now.
Yeah, I remember you saying that. I mean, it definitely the ride share trip with Jason Sudeikis is one of the
Uber scene. Yeah,
is one of the funniest moments of the year for sure.
Anyway, that's 2019,
and that's it. I had a really good time with a lot of movies, as you can see from my enormous list. I really think there are some all-timers. I think 2019 was a great year of movies. I think I mean, the fact that we got stuff like Parasite and Once Upon a Time in Hollywood in the same year is nothing short of miraculous. And I, on a personal note, I'll say 2019 was a great year, I think, for Genre Vision.
Yeah, absolutely. This was the year where I think you and I really leaned into the fact that we are going to concentrate more on library titles, that, you and I have a specific sort of niche, and I think our efforts to focus on filling that niche were good for the show.
Absolutely. I mean, you can tell that from next week's episode, where we are going to the theater, but we're going to the theater to see a movie called Underwater, because that's our bag, baby. Like,
it is absolutely our bag, and I thought that, when we were doing more theatrical releases, I keep coming back to this like stretch of theatrical releases that we did. It was like Logan and Ghost in the Shell and Life, and that big stretch of theatrical releases in, was it 2017?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I think I have a particularly vivid memory of that time, is because it's right when my dad died then.
Mm-hmm.
But we were going to the theaters so often still when we were seeing that stuff, that it just became apparent that it's like, wow, we can't keep doing this, because we were taking risks on movies that were tough to talk about for a whole hour.
Well, we had that before, where we were the infamous Morgan episode, which it's like, I haven't even gone back to listen to that episode, but the thing was like, yeah, that wasn't a movie we needed to devote an hour plus time talking about.
Nope.
That and we realized, like, okay, we need to do less of those. And then going to the theater, it was like, well, there's all these things that feel like bigger events or, meaningful, whatever. And we just realized, like, even if we want to talk about those, it doesn't mean we need to do an entire episode on them. And 2019 was the year where we were like, we know the stuff that we either need to cover or theatrically we really, really want to cover. And we've had our statements, about Star Wars and MCU and all that kind of stuff and where we stand with that. But 2019, we started leaning into the themed months, which I think we're really going to try and bring up more and more in 2020, because those have been, I think, some of our best stretch of episodes.
Scary Parents was an absolute highlight of the year for me.
Oh, yeah. Well, we also just end up watching like nothing but good movies that month.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So we always hope that we're going to watch good movies, or at least movies that are good to talk about. But that was just a whole barrage of, wow, this is good. Wow, this is good. Wow, this is good.
Mm-hmm.
and Scary Parents Month was absolutely, a home run. And we want to do more stuff like that. We want to. I even think I really liked Unconventional Vampires Month. It's like, well, we're going to do a Dr. Sleep episode, but that's our only commitment theatrically. So we built a theme month around that, and I think that might be something we look forward to in 2020 doing as well. And we hope you look forward to it too, loyal listeners. So we'll be back next week when we do Underwater, and we'll bring back listener shelf picks for our Star Wars Rise of Skywalker episode, and a comment of the week and everything. And we hope you'll be along with us, because I think I even tweeted this. I was like, Underwater is my Star Wars. Like, that's the thing I'm the most excited
We've
for.
been anticipating this like no one else has. I mean, it's like somebody made a movie just for us. So.
Yep. So we hope you'll be along for the ride next week. But we want to thank you for a great 2019, and we hope you'll stick around in 2020 and keep making the show even bigger and better. So as always, I'm Drew Deitch.
I'm Travis Newton.
And we'll see you next week.
Right here on Genre Vision.